In the autumn of 1917, on the vast, wind-scoured plains of central Nebraska, August Meyer was digging a hole. To anyone riding past on the county road, it looked like madness. He wasn't digging a well or a root cellar. He was carving a rectangle out of the earth on the south-facing slope of a low hill. A deep one. His neighbors, in their tall timber frame houses, watched him work. They saw a man not building up, but digging down. They thought he'd lost his mind. This German immigrant, a man who spoke in short, clipped sentences, was building a home you could barely see. And when the winter of 1918 hit, with a blizzard that would be spoken of for 50 years, that crazy hole in the ground would prove the difference between survival and surrender. If you want to see the number that made the county's most respected builder go silent, stay until the end. What did this quiet outsider understand about heat, wind, and earth that every experienced man in the valley had missed? If you enjoy stories of quiet competence, consider subscribing, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. August Meyer wasn't trying to revolutionize anything. He was a 38-year-old former combat engineer, a veteran of the Great War's trenches, trying to keep his family from freezing to death. His time in the German army hadn't been about glory. It had been about earthworks, drainage, and building bunkers that could withstand artillery and the brutal European winters. He understood soil. He understood how it held temperature, how it deflected force, and how it could shelter a man from the worst the world could throw at him. That knowledge, earned in the mud of Flanders, was something the men of Nebraska, with their plentiful lumber and proud traditions, couldn't comprehend. He and his wife, Elsbeth, and their two young daughters, Lena and Marta, had arrived the previous spring. They bought a small parcel of land that nobody else wanted, mostly because of the treeless, wind-swept hill that dominated it. Their first home was a rented clapboard shack on the edge of town, a temporary measure while August broke the sod for his first crop. By frontier standards, it was respectable. It had a good stove, 2 rooms, and glass windows. Then their first Nebraska winter arrived. It was a brutal lesson. The wind was a physical presence, a relentless thief that never stopped stealing heat. It found every crack in the walls, every gap around the window frames. August burned through 6 cords of wood between November and March. He fed the stove every 4 hours, day and night. Still, the inside temperature rarely climbed above 50 degrees. His daughters, Lena and Marta, slept in their coats, huddled under every blanket they owned. Elsbeth spent her evenings stuffing rags along the baseboards, only to find them frozen stiff by morning. A bucket of water left too far from the stove would have a skin of ice on it by sunrise. The cold wasn't just an inconvenience. It was a constant, draining pressure on their lives, their fuel supply, and their health. One evening in January, August sat staring at the wall, feeling a faint but steady draft on his cheek. He watched the flame in the oil lamp flicker, dancing in time with the gusts of wind outside. He knew stoves, and he knew wood. The problem wasn't the heat he was making. The problem was the house itself. It was a sieve. The thin wooden walls, for all their respectability, were little more than a windbreak. And he realized something his neighbors, born to this kind of construction, had stopped seeing. Wind doesn't just chill the air. It strips heat directly from a structure through a process called convection. The faster the wind blows, the faster the heat is pulled away. A house standing tall and proud on the prairie was a house offering its entire surface area to the hungriest thief on the plains, the wind. He thought back to the trenches. The deepest bunkers, the ones dug into the earth, were always the most stable. They were cold, yes, but it was a deep, still cold, not the biting, wind-driven cold of the surface. The earth itself, once you got a few feet down, held a steady temperature. It was a massive thermal battery. His neighbors saw the hill on his land as a problem, an obstacle to farming. August began to see it as the solution. His plan was simple in concept, but immense in labor. He wouldn't build a house to fight the wind. He would build a house the wind couldn't find. The opportunity came in late summer. A local farmer was upgrading his barn and sold August the heavy timber beams and roof planks from the old structure for $20. It was weathered but sound. For the rest, he had what the land offered, sod. Thick prairie sod with a dense root mat of buffalo grass that had been growing for 1,000 years. When he started digging that rectangle into the south-facing slope of the hill, the work was backbreaking. He wasn't just leveling a foundation, he was excavating a room. He dug down 6 feet, creating a pit 18 feet wide and 24 feet long. The north, east, and west walls of his home would be the earth itself. Only the south wall would be exposed to the elements. He worked with a quiet, methodical rhythm that unnerved the people who saw it. He cut the sod into uniform bricks, 2 feet long, a foot wide, and 4 inches thick. He stacked them aside, letting them cure slightly in the sun. This wasn't just digging a hole. It was precision earthwork. He understood that managing moisture was everything. He laid a 6-inch bed of coarse gravel at the bottom of his excavation for drainage, a lesson learned from keeping trenches from turning into muddy graves. The south-facing wall he built traditionally using the thickest sod bricks, laid like masonry with the grass side down. Each layer was offset from the one below it, the seams staggered for strength. He left openings for a sturdy door he bought for $5 and 2 small, deep-set windows. The real genius, however, was in the roof. He laid the heavy barn timbers across the excavated space, their ends resting on the top of the sod wall and anchored deep into the packed earth of the hillside. On top of these timbers, he laid the thick planking. But he didn't stop there. Now, here's what made this actually brilliant. He laid a thick layer of tar paper over the planks, creating a waterproof membrane. Then, on top of the tar paper, he carefully replaced the sod he had excavated, grass side up. He essentially pulled the prairie back over the top of his house. The roof was 2 feet thick with living earth. From the north, you wouldn't even know a house was there. It just looked like the continuation of the hill. He even built a clever, stone-lined ventilation shaft that came up 20 feet away from the house, disguised by a small pile of rocks. This would provide fresh air without creating a direct draft. It was a principle from military bunkering. Separate your ventilation from your main structure to maintain integrity. The inside was simple, but bone dry. He lined the earthen walls with more tar paper and then a layer of whitewashed planks he'd salvaged, creating a small air gap. That tiny gap was critical. It acted as a buffer, preventing the dampness of the earth from seeping into the living space. It worked like the dead air in a double-pane window. Still air insulates. The earth would keep the house at a steady baseline temperature around 50 degrees, and the small wood stove would only have to lift it another 15 or 20 degrees to be comfortable. He wasn't fighting a battle from 0 degrees up. He was fighting from 50 degrees up. From the outside, it looked like a grassy mound with a door and two small eyes. It was tiny, barely 400 square feet. A hobbit hole on the prairie. It looked poor. It looked strange. It looked like the work of a man who didn't know how to build a proper American house. Total cost, under $50. The 20 for the beams, 5 for the door, a few dollars for glass, tar paper, and hardware. As he put the finishing touches on the chimney in late October, his wife Elsbeth came out, a shawl wrapped tight around her shoulders. She looked at the strange, low dwelling, then back towards the road, where a neighbor's wagon was slowing down so the occupants could stare. "August," she said, her voice soft. "People are going to think we've lost our minds." August didn't look up from his work, setting a stone into the mortar. "Let them," he said. And when neighbors saw it, they didn't see engineering. They saw poverty. They saw a man taking a step backward, not forward. The ridicule started before the first snow. It wasn't always malicious, but it was constant. The first to make his opinion known was Silas Croft. Croft ran the lumber mill and had built more than half the cabins in the valley. He was a respected authority, a man whose word on construction was taken as gospel. He rode out one Saturday on the pretense of seeing if August needed any milled lumber for the interior. He walked around the sod house, his brow furrowed. He kicked at the wall with the toe of his boot. "Meyer," he said, not unkindly, "I don't know how you did things in the old country, but this is a mistake." August simply stood, his hands resting on his hips, waiting. "You're going to have damp," Croft declared. "Mark my words, come spring, this whole place will be a mildewed bog. The weight of that roof, with the snow on it, it's going to collapse on your family. You've built a trap, not a house." He was gesturing with his hands, explaining physics as he understood it. His experience was with wood, a material that fought the elements. He couldn't grasp the concept of a house that joined them. August's response was characteristically terse. "Just trying something different, Silas." Croft shook his head, a look of genuine pity on his face. "Different isn't always better. You'll be at my lumber yard by January, I reckon. I'll set some timber aside for you." He rode off, confident he'd just given necessary, if unwelcome, advice. The public mockery was less gentle. It happened at the trading post. August was there to buy flour and coffee when a rough-looking ranch hand named Jed, a man known for his loud mouth, saw him. "Hey, look!" Jed shouted, loud enough for the whole store to hear. "It's the Prairie Dog! Heard you're not building a house, Meyer. Heard you're digging your own grave to save the undertaker the trouble." A few men snickered. The store owner looked embarrassed, but said nothing. August paid for his goods, met Jed's mocking gaze for a brief second, and gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. He didn't argue. He didn't defend himself. He simply left. His silence was interpreted as weakness or shame. The nickname stuck. To some, he was now Prairie Dog Meyer. The gossip network buzzed. At the weekly quilting circle, the women would ask Elsbeth, their voices dripping with false sympathy, if she was managing all right, and if she wasn't afraid of the walls caving in. Conversations would go quiet when she entered a room. They pitied her, married to a man so strange, so backward. The pity was harder to bear than outright cruelty. It made her feel like a charity case. Then came the institutional skeptic. Mr. Abernathy, the county extension agent, arrived in a black Ford Model T. He was a man of science and progress, armed with pamphlets from the Department of Agriculture on modern farmstead construction. He carried a clipboard and made notes. "Mr. Meyer," he began, his tone officious, "I've had some reports about your choice of dwelling. This type of construction, a dugout, as it were, is not in any manual I've seen. We have concerns about sanitation, ventilation, and structural integrity. It's irregular." August gestured to the stone-lined chimney and the cleverly hidden ventilation shaft. "It breathes," he said. "It's dry." Abernathy peered at the plans Auguste had sketched on a piece of butcher paper. He pursed his lips. "It's clever, I'll grant you, but it's unproven. The standards exist for a reason, to prevent disaster." He made a note on his clipboard. "I'll have to file a report. I'd strongly advise you to consider a more conventional structure before the deep winter sets in." But the cut that went deepest came from family. Elsbeth's brother Thomas came to visit for Sunday dinner. He was a good man, a farmer who had done well for himself. He had a large two-story house and was proud of it. After dinner, he pulled August aside. "August, I'm worried," Thomas said, his voice low and earnest. "Elsbeth, she doesn't say anything, but I can see the strain. People are talking. They're not just saying you're eccentric. They're saying you don't know what you're doing, that you're either too poor or too stubborn to build a proper home for your wife and girls." He paused, the words catching in his throat. "People are going to think you're either scared of the prairie or you're incompetent. Maybe both." This was criticism framed as concern, and it was the sharpest blade of all. It wasn't about engineering. It was about August's standing as a man, a husband, a father. August looked at his brother-in-law, his expression unreadable. He put a hand on Thomas's shoulder. "I'm not trying to impress anyone, Thomas," he said, his voice level and calm. "I'm trying to keep my family warm." By November, as the first bitter cold settled over the plains, not one person in the county thought August Meyer had solved anything. They thought he'd built a monument to his own foolishness, a cramped, dark hole that would be a damp tomb by spring. They were certain he and his family were in for a winter of misery and regret. Stay with me, because what happened next didn't just prove August Meyer right. It changed how people in that valley thought about survival itself. Then December came, and it brought the kind of cold that separates theory from reality. The winter of 1918 is still recorded in Nebraska's climatology archives as one of the most severe in the 20th century. It wasn't just a storm, it was a siege. It began on December 14th. The temperature dropped to 10 degrees overnight, normal for a Nebraska winter, but it didn't rise. December 18th, 22 degrees. December 21st, the first day of winter, the thermometer read 30 degrees at dawn, with winds gusting to 40 miles per hour. The wind chill was a staggering 70 degrees. Then the snow started. It wasn't a gentle flake. It was a horizontal blizzard, a white wall moving across the plains. For 11 consecutive days, the thermometer never climbed above zero. The snow fell without stopping for 72 hours. It drifted into massive dunes, burying fences, roads, and outbuildings. The wind howled, a constant shrieking assault that made the wood frame houses groan and shudder. The valley began to break down. This was a cold that found every weakness. The suffering was specific and widespread. Silas Croft, the lumberman, was working day and night, delivering emergency cordwood. The Colby Ranch, the biggest in the area, was burning 3 cords of wood a week in their massive fireplace and multiple stoves, and their sprawling ranch house was holding a miserable 40 degrees. Their cattle began to die in the fields, frozen solid where they stood. Thomas, August's brother-in-law, had his well pump freeze solid. He and his sons had to spend 6 hours a day melting snow on their stove just for water for their livestock, burning precious fuel in the process. His wife and children were living in 2 rooms, the rest of their big, proud house closed off to conserve heat. Their interior temperature hovered at 45 degrees. Other families were worse off. The Jensens, a young couple with a newborn, had their chimney clogged with ice and creosote, their cabin filled with smoke, forcing them to put out their only source of heat. They survived by huddling in bed under every piece of fabric they owned. People were burning furniture to stay warm. Children were getting sick, their coughs echoing in the frigid rooms. Winter on the frontier had always been hard, but this was different. This was a state of emergency. This was a fight for survival. And then, during the brief lulls in the wind, people started noticing the Meyer place, or rather, what they didn't notice. They saw no signs of distress, no frantic chopping of wood, no desperate attempts to chink walls with frozen mud. All they saw was a single, thin plume of smoke rising from the stone chimney. It wasn't the thick, panicked smoke of a stove being fed constantly. It was a lazy, efficient wisp. And stranger still, on the one afternoon the wind died down for an hour, Silas Croft, making a delivery run, saw August Meyer step outside his sod house. He wasn't wearing a heavy coat. He was in his shirt sleeves, a pipe in his mouth, knocking snow off the roof with a broom as if it were a mild spring day. He worked for 10 minutes, then calmly went back inside. The sight was so bizarre, so completely out of sync with the desperation gripping the rest of the valley, that Silas almost thought he'd imagined it. A man in shirt sleeves, in a 30-degree world. Something impossible was happening in that hole in the ground. Stay with me, because the number that came out of this cabin didn't just surprise the valley, it rewrote the rules. The breaking point for Silas Croft came on Christmas Eve. The temperature was 38 degrees. The wind had picked up again. He was worried about the Meyers, the strange German and his family, alone out there in their dirt hovel. Despite his dismissal of the house, he was a decent man. He loaded his sleigh with a half-cord of his best oak, a gift, assuming they must be on the verge of freezing. He figured their pride had kept them from asking for help. He pulled up to the low-slung dwelling. The snow was drifted up to the roofline on 3 sides. The house looked more like a natural feature of the landscape than a human habitation. He knocked on the heavy wooden door, bracing himself against the wind. The door opened. Elsbeth Meyer stood there, and the first thing that hit Silas Croft wasn't a word. It was a feeling. A wave of warmth rolled out of the doorway, so shocking and so profound it felt like stepping into a different season. It was a quiet, steady, radiant heat, not the scorching, dry heat of an overstoked stove, but the deep, comfortable warmth of a summer kitchen. He stared, bewildered. Elsbeth was wearing a simple cotton house dress, no shawl, no sweater. Behind her, through the cabin opening, Croft saw the girls, Lena and Marta, sitting at the small wooden table. They were drawing on slate boards. They were in light cotton dresses, not coats, not blankets, dresses. The air in the small room was still and clear. There was no smoke, no shivering. Everything all right in here? Silas stammered, feeling foolish with his load of emergency firewood. Elsbeth smiled, a calm, gentle expression. We're fine, Silas. We're managing fine. Please, come in out of that wind. He stepped inside. The door shut, and the raging howl of the blizzard vanished. The silence was as shocking as the warmth. The single room was small but tidy. A pot of soup simmered on the small stove, which glowed with a gentle, controlled fire, its damper nearly closed. "Your fuel," Silas began. "Are you running low? I brought—" "That's very kind," August said, stepping forward from the corner where he'd been mending a harness. He, too, was in shirt-sleeves. "But we have plenty. We are not even through our second cord for the winter." Silas stared at him. "Your second? August, people are burning half a cord a week. Thomas is going through a cord every 10 days just to keep his house above freezing." "We are burning less than a quarter cord a week," August said simply. He wasn't boasting. He was stating a fact. Silas Croft, the man who built with wood and understood right angles and proud vertical lines, felt his entire worldview tilting. It didn't make sense. It was impossible. His eyes scanned the room, looking for an answer, a trick. He saw the wall thermometer next to the door. He walked over to it, his boots heavy on the wooden floor. The mercury sat clearly and steadily at 68 degrees. Let that sink in for a moment. 68 degrees. While outside, the world was a maelstrom of wind and ice at 38 degrees below zero. That was a temperature difference of 106 degrees. Silas touched the interior wall. It wasn't cold. It wasn't damp. It was cool to the touch, but it felt solid, inert. He ran his hand over the whitewashed planks, bone dry. He looked at the stove, a small, efficient model, and saw the wood box next to it was 3/4 full. This wasn't a fluke. This wasn't a temporary victory against the cold. This was a system that was performing at a level he couldn't have imagined. He turned back to August, his face a mixture of awe and disbelief. August had been keeping meticulous records. He pulled out a small ledger. The data was there, stark and irrefutable. The Colby Ranch, 3 cords a month, holding 40 degrees. Thomas's farm, 2.5 cords a month, holding 45 degrees. The Jensen cabin, nearly 2 cords a month just to stay above freezing. August Meyer's sod house, 3/4 of a cord a month, holding a steady 68 degrees. The difference wasn't incremental, it was categorical. August was achieving a level of comfort and dignity that was unimaginable to his neighbors, and he was doing it with less than 1/3 of the fuel. Silas Croft, the valley's foremost expert on building, a man whose family had been building timber houses on the prairie for 70 years, looked at the German engineer. He looked at the warm, safe children playing in their dresses. He looked at the thermometer again, as if to ensure it wasn't a trick of the light. He finally understood. August hadn't built a grave. He hadn't built a hovel. He had built a fortress against the cold. He had used the earth itself as his primary shield. Silas slowly took off his hat, holding it in his hands. He looked August Meyer square in the eye. His voice was low, heavy with the weight of a lifetime of assumptions being shattered. "We've been doing this wrong," he said, "for 70 years. We've been doing this all wrong." The real vindication wasn't just in the numbers. It was in the quality of life those numbers provided. While other children were huddled in coats, too cold to focus on schoolwork, Lena and Marta learned their letters in comfort. While other women struggled to cook in freezing kitchens, Elsbeth prepared meals in a warm, pleasant space. While other families slept fitfully, waking to stoke the fire, the Myers slept soundly through the night. August's system didn't just keep them alive. It turned winter from something to be survived into something to be lived through. It gave them dignity. When the blizzard finally broke after Christmas, word spread like wildfire. It started with Silas Croft. He didn't just admit he was wrong, he became a convert. He told everyone who would listen about the impossible warmth inside the Meyer place. He told them the numbers: 68 degrees, a 106-degree differential, less than a cord a month. The story was so incredible that most people didn't believe it, so they went to see for themselves. A steady trickle of neighbors began making the trek to the strange house on the hill. They'd arrive bundled in layers of wool and fur, their faces raw from the cold, and August or Elsbeth would open the door. Each one was met with that same shocking wave of warmth. Each one saw the children in their dresses. Each one saw the number on the thermometer. Mr. Abernathy, the county agent, returned, this time with a calibrated scientific thermometer. He was skeptical, suspecting the family's own thermometer was broken. He placed his instrument in the center of the room and waited. He measured the outside temperature. He measured the fuel consumption. He checked August's ledger. When he was done, he packed his equipment in silence. The numbers were not just real. They were, in his words, staggering. The first to build his own was a young farmer named Ben Carter. The blizzard had almost ruined him. He'd lost half his herd and had burned through his entire winter wood supply by January. He came to August not with skepticism, but with desperate humility. "Can you show me?" he asked. August didn't gloat. He didn't charge a fee. He simply walked Ben through the principles: the thermal mass of the earth, the importance of the southern exposure, the necessity of a waterproof membrane and an air gap. Ben didn't have a convenient hill, so he built a simpler variation on level ground, berming the earth up high against the north, east, and west walls. It wasn't as efficient as August's, but the next winter, Ben cut his wood consumption by over 60%, and his family lived in comfort for the first time. That proved it was replicable. By the spring of 1918, 7 more families were digging. By the following winter, there were nearly 20 sod-and-earth homes in the valley, each a variation on August's design. They became known as Meyer houses. Silas Croft even began specializing in them, using his construction expertise to refine the roof structures and interior finishing, always giving August full credit for the concept. Mr. Abernathy published a special bulletin through the county extension office titled Principles of Subterranean and Earthen Bermed Dwellings for the Northern Plains. It was filled with temperature logs, fuel consumption charts, and diagrams based on August's original design. The bulletin was circulated to other counties, and the idea began to spread across Nebraska and the Dakotas. What August Meyer had built in 1917, relying on principles learned in the trenches of a foreign war, anticipated by nearly a century what modern building scientists would rediscover and call passive house and earth-sheltered construction. He never sought fame or fortune from it. When praised, he would just shrug. "This isn't new," he'd say. "It is just correct. The earth is a better coat than wood." The original sod house stood for over 60 years. August and Elsbeth lived out their lives there, and it remained a landmark long after, a gentle green mound on the side of a hill, a testament to a quiet man who listened to the land instead of shouting at it. The frontier didn't reward stubbornness or tradition for their own sake. It rewarded what worked. It rewarded the quiet observation, the meticulous planning, and the courage to try something different, even in the face of ridicule. It rewarded the man who understood that the greatest strength sometimes comes not from standing tall, but from nestling deep. Drop a comment below. Where are you watching from? And what's the coldest winter you've ever had to face? Subscribe for more stories of forgotten wisdom and proven frontier techniques. This video presents historically inspired reconstructions of survival and engineering techniques. The characters, names, and specific events are fictionalized for narrative purposes, but the building principles are based on real historical practices of sod house construction and earth-sheltered dwellings used by pioneers and indigenous peoples on the American plains.